I am Kevin McGruder, an assistant professor of history here at Antioch College, and thank you for coming to this 50th anniversary panel for the Afro American Studies Institute. Before we get started, we are going to have a practice that many African cultures have when they have ceremonies. They open it up with libation, and it has several meanings. In terms of what we're going to do this morning, we are going to reflect on those who were part of the program who had transitioned. And so I'm going to turn that over to Bomani Moyinde, and he will lead us through that.
Good morning, my name is Bomani. Good morning. You can hear me. Okay, typical Antioch students, it's hard to get y'all quiet down there. Yeah. So, in these ceremonies, one of the things we wish to do is, when we think about the Afro American Studies Institute and the purpose, what those people were about, and what their struggles were, we know they're linked to a long tradition of resistance, revolutionary resistance. And so to link up that history of struggle with people of this program and those who have passed away, I'd like for you to take a moment and silently consider the names of those people who have been involved in that struggle over the last few hundred years, and then over the last century, and then over the last 50 years, and let some of those names come to your mind now. And I will ask you to speak those names out into the atmosphere. This is how we bring the ancestors present with us, and the spirit of what they stood for, that spirit of vibrancy, that unique spirit that links us all, really, but for our purposes in particular to the AASI. And then I will ask members up here, we have a list of 17 members of AASI who have joined the ancestors, and I will ask these gentlemen here to call for those names, and for reference, we have a list right here. So, and then I will pour libations. Libations is a form of acknowledging the ancestors' presence. I will pour, if we were outside, I would pour a liquid into the ground. A lot of times it's done with alcohol, but for the safety of us all, we use the water today. That's that. So if you would, please now, you can begin to call forth those names I asked you about, and just, let it fly. Fred Douglass.
Tucson Louverture.
Yeah. My grandfather.
Lester Chisholm. Yay.
Malcolm X.
Bobby Walker. I said.
Ida B. Wells.
I said.
Monroe Trout.
I said.
Andrew Young.
Martin Luther King.
Amiri Baraka.
I'm talking about.
James Farmer.
Said.
Coretta Scott King.
I didn't hear that. Coretta who?
Scott King.
Flo Kennedy.
Coretta Scott King.
Thank you.
Flo Kennedy.
I said. Paul Lawrence Dunbar. I said.
Julian Bond.
I said.
Angela Davis.
I said.
Paul Rosen.
I said.
Larry Rustin.
I said.
Hold the judge. James
W.S.
Baldwin.
McIntosh.
I said.
Rosa Parks.
John Lewis.
John Lewis still living.
We have a food stamp.
And this is a different John Lewis. Y'all talking about John Lewis, the labor guy, or John Lewis, the civil rights guy? Which guy we talking about?
He's still living.
We
Well,
won't
let's
tell
deal with
y'all.
John Lewis, the
We
labor.
won't tell him, y'all think he dead.
James Chaney.
Trayvon Martin.
Andrew Goodman.
Harry Jones. Catherine Brown.
Yeah, Emmett Till.
David Goodman. W.D. Bourgeois.
Sorry, sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
Michael Brown.
Charles Nichols.
Minnie Till Mobley.
Amadou-
John Coltrane.
Amadou Diallo.
Yeah.
Virginia Hamilton.
Cecil Taylor.
Thelonious Monk.
I said.
That's what we talking about.
Yeah. Okay, if one of you gentlemen would pick up that list, and I'd like for you to read 4 names each, 4 names, Maceo, then pass it to your left, 4 names, pass to your left, and then on the end, please read the last 3, and after each group, I will pour a libation into this plant, and when I do that, I will raise my staff and you will say Ashe. Ashe is a spiritual command or declaration, meaning so be it or let it be so. Okay, if you begin, Mace.
Chuck Smart.
Go ahead and read it for the first one.
Well, not a member of AASI, but she brought us here. Joel Graham.
Yeah.
Bob Rhodes.
Yeah.
Joe Howard.
Ashe.
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 Follow directions. I'll raise my staff. Very good.
Tindaji Ganges. Gary Harris. Anita Hillman Brower. Ron Hassan Clark.
Milton Holmes. Willie McClellan. George Edison. And Yolanda Hernandez Edison.
Alton X. Patterson, Ron D., Janice Jordan, David Truly.
Let them join us.
Edzo Matthews.
That's a Matthew.
And don't forget Archie Hunter.
Archie Hunter.
Okay, turn it back over.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Money. Our panelists this morning are all men, but this program was not all men led. There were women that were involved in it, and this came together fairly quickly, and because of scheduling problems, the women who were invited weren't able to be here. So, but I do want to acknowledge that women were an integral part of this program. I learned about this program about a year ago when I think Maceo Cofield contacted me. We had already worked on several other initiatives on campus, and he mentioned that there were 60 reel-to-reel tapes from the AASI program that Bill Brower, alum, had, and wanted to figure out how to make them more widely available. And we began to talk in conference calls and came up with the idea of raising money to have them digitized so that then they could be made more widely available. And last summer, through the 365 Project, which is a Yellow Springs-based organization that promotes programs focusing on racial equity, we did a crowdfunding campaign and raised over $2,000, and so we use that to digitize those tapes. So the digitization is done, and as we continue to talk, about half of our conversations were about the organization and planning, and even for this meeting, but the other half was about all the other things that were happening during that time. And for me as a historian, I was always taking notes because it was such a rich exchange of history that I've been here for 6 years, and a lot of it I had not heard. And so that's one of the reasons why we want to bring people together today, and this is really a beginning, that the AASI program, it was really part of a broader movement. There's a book that came out about 8 years ago by Ibram X. Kendi. It's called The Black Campus Movement. What he looks at is what was happening on college campuses across the country in the late 60s, early 70s. And these are historically black colleges, but also predominantly white colleges. And at most of them, black students were advocating for change. And often they were advocating for courses that reflected their own culture. And so AASI fits in that category. From what I've read, I think there's some unique aspects of it that you'll hear about this morning from our panelists. And before I go forward, let me just introduce them. Maceo Cofield, at the end, next to him is Bill Brower, Robyn King, and Chuck Bell. The other reason I believe this is important is for our students today, and there are some in the audience now, is that particularly students of color here at Antioch can be an alienating experience, and I think as they've talked with alumni of color, on both sides they've been struck at how similar their experiences are, whether it was 50 years ago or now. And so this program can give us an idea of what was possible at that time and maybe what we can do now. I'm going to turn things over now to Maceo, who's going to give a little bit more detailed history of the program.
So I have the hardest job in this whole thing because somehow I'm supposed to give the history of this piece in 10 minutes. Usually if I speak extemporaneously, we would be here for the next 5 days. I will try to use some notes, so let's go with that. Number one, the year was very crazy. There was a lot of racial upheaval, social upheaval, upheaval with the women's movement. There was a crazy president having been elected. Wait a minute, that's this year. Let's go back to 1968. All right, so now back to history. Antioch students and faculty have been very much involved in the civil rights movement, and for that matter, liberal whites from Antioch College have been a very important part of the struggle for civil and human rights from the beginnings of the college history. Still, the black movement would not have had a presence had there not been for the creation of the so-called Rockefeller Program, the proper name for which was the Antioch Program for Interracial Education, APIE. The program was called the Rockefeller Program because the college has solicited and received grants from the Rockefeller Foundation and the Fels Foundation, among others, to experiment with integrating the Yellow Springs campus. Until the creation of APIE, there was not a critical mass of black and Latino students at Antioch that was large enough for anyone, least not themselves, to take notice of their unifying interests. First director of the APIE was Dixon Bush. Bush hired Jewel Graham, Ruth Stewart, and later at different times Alex Bart and Alfie Wortham. The APIE recruited students through a system that was created with alumni panels located in St. Louis, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and other cities. The idea, quoting a memo from that era, and an actual memo from that era, the college is engaged in a process of testing whether intelligence perceived in one setting can be applied in a very different one. We are trying to discover if Antioch community can teach the differently prepared. And in addition to acknowledging that these students were prepared differently, they were also looking for students who were leaders, who either had relatively high test scores or high grades, not necessarily both, and who stood out intellectually, and also who were culturally deprived.
Culturally what?
Deprived. That's you, brother. Oh, that's right, he was culturally, he had all that. I forgot. Dropping a group of inner-city Black, Latino, Native American, and Appalachian students into an affluent and upper-middle-class, predominantly white campus with little or no preparation for anyone involved was bound to lead to a continuum of responses from those students spanning total acculturation to outright alienation. This, of course, does not at all address the response of the students and faculty resident on the Antioch campus when the APIE students were introduced to their environment. Alienation often leads to politicalization. The fact is that the politicalization of the API students did not occur for the first year or so. Most of these students just trying to find themselves. But one ironic issue is that there had been some discussion actually in the administration of Antioch to segregate these students when they first got here to aid them in integrating into the community. I'm just giving facts, folks. There's a video record, though decimated by time and obsolete technology, of the reaction of those students, and and oddly enough, it was. I'm not gonna go there. I'll leave it alone. The tapes do reveal some record of the students' reaction to their setting. Jewel Graham, particularly Jewel, had weekly sessions to record the students' reaction on how they were faring in this new setting. By watching it, you can actually watch the slow politicalization of the students. Eventually, the students began to look for politicalization. They were politicized in a certain extent in a low level, with the initial organization being the Black Student Study Group. The Black Student Study Group was put together by students with the assistance of upperclassman Prexy Nesbitt and students from Central State, Des Ramato, who was Ethiopian, and Waldo Stefanos, who was also Eritrean. Of course, I shouldn't say ultra Eritrean, he was Eritrean. The question for this group was, how can we solve and fix the wretched condition of Black folks in this nation? And many of these students began to search for the answer to this problem. However, a number of students began analyzing the question with the idea there may be a number of ways to solve the problem. The critical mass of students included not only students from the Antioch program for interracial education, but also included students who were there at Antioch through other means. One student, for example, came on a Navy scholarship.
Oh, that was me.
That would be you. Some upper-class Black students were there on Antioch campus prior to APIE. Some of those students, when confronted with the influx of Black students, felt very uncomfortable. Some of them actually transferred away from Antioch to get away from so many Black students. Again, the minority presence on campus was always relatively small. There were 10, 15, 20 students brought in at a time. The number never exceeded more than 50 or so students on campus at any given time, and this was an era when there were 2,500 students attending Antioch. As I said earlier, minority students at Antioch were truly affected by the impact of what was going around the nation. The Nation of Islam was very active at the time. Martin Luther King activities were front and center to the students right up to his assassination. Students avidly followed the conflict between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Dr. King's subsequent assassination. Also, the rise of the Black Panther, the rise of US in San Francisco, Amir Baraka and his activities in Newark. All these things were happening in the national scene, and students of color were not only hearing about them and reading about them, they were experiencing them to a certain extent because what was happening to them. These students were traveling on co-ops actually into these areas. During that time, this person here spent time in California around the Panther Party. Students came from New York and Chicago where they had close hand knowledge of various political and internationalist activities. When students co-opt either in their own cities or in cities much like where they were from, many sought out radical political experiences. This was another way that the campus politicalization process moved forward at an unnaturally rapid pace. I'm trying to skip forward here. But basically what happened was, we realized what we needed was an education that better armed us to be able to go out into the world that we saw, that we understood to need a different focus. The process in dealing with the administration here came to a head with a strike, which was really a lockout. Black students changed the doors of Kelly Hall, the administration building at Antioch, after negotiations broke down. The process ended up with the college acceding to most of the students' demands. As a matter of fact, the feeling by this writer was almost as though they were giving us just enough rope to hang ourselves. The students were given $15,000 initially and were given a free hand at putting together a program of higher education that met our stated needs. Fortunately, we did not fully comprehend the daunting nature of this task, so therefore we were not daunted. Therein ensued a series of meetings, some of them held in Philadelphia, involving Antioch students and outsiders, Tom Porter, Bob Rhodes, and others, as we struggled with designing the system that would provide for our education. We would hire, with the money provided by Antioch, one of our undergraduate students, Minnie Johnson, as an accountant. Since she was also an accounting major, she would and did track the money diligently. We decided to hire black PhD students from either. That's the mix of what was happening in 1967, 68 in this country was amazing. At the same time we were doing what we were doing, there were a group of black PhDs at the University of Chicago who had come together and politicized themselves in such a way that they created an organization that we were able to reach out to. There were people in Philadelphia who were able to reach out, people in Cincinnati. So the medium was right for us as students and for Antioch as an organization to really reap the rewards of what was going on nationally. With the money provided by Antioch, we basically hired lecturers from the University of Chicago. They came to the Yellow Springs campus. They lectured over the course of a weekend, sometimes 30 hours straight. The undergraduate students selected as facilitators for those classes would break the tapes down to 1.5 hour lectures, and those lectures would then be offered in class, as normal class. These were Antioch credits. And I don't have the quote by a certain person who talked about the intellectual rigor needed to go through this program, but it was, I would say, and more demanding than the rigor that was exhibited in the standard Antioch classes, okay? I know that I can say that because, don't be bragging. There were a number of people who went through that program who graduated in class of 1971, okay? It was the largest group of minorities to graduate from Antioch College in its history. Since then, which is sick, but since then, no more. But of that group of 28 students, about 70% of them went on to get terminal degrees. PhDs, MDs, whatever. So, if in fact there was lax rigor here, then there was lax rigor at Yale, lax rigor which allowed these people, and Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and on and on and on, that built, that somehow they tricked ourselves and we tricked everybody and we was good at tricking. I don't know. This process has been emulated in a number of places since then. One of the things that we talked about when we were developing this actually ended up Antioch writing it into a number of proposals, Mort Brown, Jim Dixon, everything, how to expand educational access without significant brick and mortar costs. I actually sat in a room with a group of people who actually came up with that phrase. Next time I saw it, it was in the proposal for Union Graduate School. And that's a damn fact too. So, I can go on and on, and my 10 minutes is probably up now, so I'll stop. But the fact is, well, you don't know. Look, I work at, I'm retired now, but one thing, I was interviewed by a young person the other day, and I told him, you got an arrogant old man who's able to sit and talk about himself. Do you realize how much I felt like having a cigarette after? So let's stop there. But I'll say that's a general history of AASI, which I think Bill and others can talk about as far as some of the specifics of some of the classes that were offered. And what we're talking about here as far as the tapes and the class content of that curriculum, the curriculum and class content, which made the Afro American Studies Institute extremely important. And we can talk about Unity House also. I meant to mention Unity House. That, of course, everybody talks about the Black Dorm. Unity House was an experience that we had, that we put together, that we thought was important for us at the time. And, you know, from the time we moved from nationalism into proletarian internationalism, the fact is that Unity House was important to us until it wasn't important to us. And then the U.S. government wanted to sue Antioch and on and on and on. Tell him, Billy, who negotiated for the U.S. government when we were negotiating with the legal aspect of that?
I can't remember the guy's name,
Oh, you can't?
but you know his name. You say it.
Bill Brower.
No, for the government, representative
Oh,
of
for
the
the
government.
government. Oh, I thought.
No, the government representative was a gentleman who was the head of the Office of Civil Rights at that point by the name of Leon Panetta.
Who was president of Antioch?
Jim Dixon. And so, by the way, for those who have all kind of hate for Jim Dixon because for us, he was pretty cool.
What was that guy's name?
Leon Panetta.
So Leon Panetta, I'm Bill Brower. I live in D.C. I have no D. And I was in Antioch for 5 years and never completed a course in the curriculum. There's a couple classes I did start, like Russian, went once or twice and didn't go back. Yet in 1971, I was given a degree. So I went through 5 years here, never took a class in the curriculum, and got a degree. So, you know, well, AASI and ISSP. A couple of things when you start off and you read that that early on, Antioch thought that it might be a good idea to segregate the black students so they can make the transition. Well, we segregated ourselves. So maybe there was some insight there. And even in those remarks, I have a greater appreciation for what the people that were running institutions might have been thinking about and what they were considering. The other thing is, this morning I got up and I took a walk through the town, and it's I don't really. It's like a new place to me, and I don't know why that should be the case. But I haven't been here since 1971. I haven't been to Dayton or Cincinnati or Springfield or Wilberforce or Yellow Springs since 1971. So I'm really relearning what Yellow Springs is and what the campus is. I'm trying to figure out, like, where was the black dorm?
That's gone.
Okay, that's satisfied because I walked up and down the street.
The last one is still there with the West Hall because
It was West Hall. So I thought we had, okay, so it's West Hall.
We were in two locations.
Right.
The presidents, and for a while we had West Hall.
Right. So, it's all very interesting. But there's a sign, kind of a historical marker about the college, which talks about who started it and how it started. And the origin of this institution in the Unitarian movement and that type of liberalism is just very interesting. Right now in Washington, All Souls Community Church, which is a historically progressive church, Unitarian church in Washington, is going through struggles that are around the racial justice issues. And it's the same kind of conflict between that brand of liberalism and that church tradition and what black people see as their interest. And while in a general sense, we are allies or see ourselves as allies or see connections between what we're advocating, there's some really profound differences that seem to emerge periodically and tend to rip things apart. So I just, I didn't, and I also walked by the Humanist House, which is one of the things I did in my freshman year was go to some meetings there. And the connection between humanism and Unitarian, all of that it's very clear what this town has historically been about. And why the infusion of young urban black men and women could represent such a challenge to the community and to the college. But having said that, Tom Porter's name was mentioned. I think Alvin Bailey's name might have been mentioned. Those are two individuals who live in Washington who knew that I was in possession of Robert Rhodes' material. If you don't know who Robert Rhodes is, we're going to uncover him for you. He was one of the great, profound black left thinkers of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And he was largely an underground presence. We got involved in Dayton and in Cincinnati. We were involved with a lot of activities that were connected with Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And Tom Porter was based in Cincinnati. And I remember going down there in the summertime and they would say, Bob Rhodes coming to town tonight. And people started going out and getting their Ripple. Y'all know what Ripple is?
Yeah.
Okay, started getting their bottles of Ripple, starting to get the nickel and dime bags. I thought Bob Rhodes was a saxophone player. Why else were people preparing to get their heads right? He had to be a great jazz musician. It turned out he was a great lecturer. That particular evening, Bob didn't come to Cincinnati. Later, we went to the Philadelphia Black Power Conference. And at that time, the conference kind of took over the city. And one day I remember hearing the name that Bob Rhodes is lecturing at this school, but Maulana Ron Karinga and Baraka were at a different school. So that's where I and those of us who went to Philadelphia went, because we were more following that line at that time. So we didn't meet Bob then. Later, we're back on campus, and Tom Porter calls and says, Bob Rhodes is coming to town. Bob's based in Chicago, and you ought to come down and see him. So Millie Hawk Daniels and I took a bus down to Cincinnati to meet Bob Rhodes. And it was like, it was about 20 people, might have been a house, might have been a community center, I'm not quite sure what the setting was. A lot of fried chicken and a lot of Budweiser. Because Bob liked to drink. But it did not debilitate his capacity. And he just tore us apart. Like I would say, well, we believe, he said, that's subjective idealism. Man, get that shit out of here. To say something, oh, that's subjective, that's some bullshit. What you need to be dealing with is dialectical and historical materialism. That is the modality of analysis that you need to be concerned with. So we came back to campus, actually kind of crushed, and said, look, we all need to mount up and go to Chicago because a larger constituency has to make this decision. Like, this seems to be the most exciting thing intellectually that we've encountered. We've been dealing with all the top, quote unquote, black intellectuals in the country. But this guy has the goods. He can give us a curriculum. We all mounted up, we went to Chicago. At that time in Chicago, they had something called the Communiversity. It's fantastic. Bob was one of the people that taught there. And they just introduced us to Chicago. I mean, we saw so many different things, and we came back and we decided, that weekend we came up with the idea of that they could come periodically, give lectures. Some of the senior students could lead the sessions in between the lecture periods, and that's how we would develop the curriculum, and that's what we did. When I left here in 1971, and we did it in the context of revolution, we thought at that time that this country was moving towards revolutionary change. And therefore, we thought it was important for people not to know what we were doing. So initially, the black dorm was simply that. It was the black dorm, and it allowed us to socialize and all the things that we needed and found in that. But it eventually evolved to a kind of a cover for what we were actually doing, that we did not want the college in general to know about, or the community, or the Greene County, or whomever to know about. I've had these materials since 1971, 65 tapes, representing 120 hours of lectures. I just have the Bob Rhodes tapes. They're Joe Howard tapes. They're Harold Rogers tapes. They're Leith Mullins tapes.
Karen Washington tapes.
They're Karen Washington tapes. Now, hopefully, some of the students, like myself, took those things with them when they left. And hopefully, we can uncover and add that to the mix. But we have 120 hours of Bob's lectures, plus Bob's papers, papers on African liberation, papers on colonialism, papers on imperialism, papers on dialectical distortion, his private writings that were circulated in the black left, but not published. In other words, the Communist Party USA wasn't publishing Bob's stuff. Socialist Workers Party wasn't publishing Bob's stuff. Bob was creating his own cadres, because Bob's idea was to reinvigorate the moribund Communist Party USA. Bob bought into the Soviet international position, not the Chinese position. And he felt that the American Party was bankrupt. And we used to go to events. I said Gus Hall, Henry Winston, all of them, been associated with all of them. They all old men, all on canes. We like 18, 19, 20 years old. I could not see in them revolution. But it was Bob's idea that by developing these cadres, he could renew that institution, that party. And that party had been decimated. McCarthy, Taft-Hartley, you name it, party had been decimated. Out of what we did here, Bob ended up at Ohio University as an assistant professor and had a legitimate academic career. But what he did here was underground. And what we're doing now is bringing that material out. And when I went to my storage unit, I saw not only that I had the tapes, that I had the curriculum materials, but I also had the collected works of Lenin. I also had the collected works of Marx and Engels and things by Stalin and selected works by others, and many periodicals, and many Soviet texts. I think it's about 8 boxes of materials that we packed up and shipped out here. And I'll finish by saying that there are 3 things that I think can happen from what we've initiated. One, there should be a Robert Rhodes collection of Marxist-Leninist materials. That's what we have donated. And if people really take this time to examine those materials, they will see the value, even if they don't agree with it ideologically, they will see the value in that material. Maybe we should call it the Oliver S. Loud Robert Rhodes collection of Marxist-Leninist materials. Because Oliver Loud was a physics professor during our time. And when he went on a sabbatical, he gave me the keys to his office. But he had 2 offices. He had the office he gave me the key to, then he had another office he did give me the key to. So what did I do? I took the door off or maybe Robyn and I took the door off the hinges, which gave us access to all of Oliver's collection. And he must have been involved in the movement in Marxism-Leninism from his youth, because he had all of this classic stuff, all of these pamphlets and things. And so, in my mindlessness of the time, I just felt like that was my stuff, and double-the-size stuff. So that too traveled with me to Washington. And maybe, I don't know how many years ago, I don't know if Steve Duffy's in the room or not, but I got in touch with I started calling Antioch and feeling guilty about, I've got this guy's collection and I need to return it. Plus a part of the Antioch library and plus a part of the University of Dayton library. And So I started returning these materials to the University of Dayton. I mailed it anonymously.
As a former employee at University of Dayton, your ass is under arrest.
And I started returning things to the campus. And then the latest batch of material, which I think is really the most valuable, really the mother lode, the treasure chest that we've returned this week. So the second thing that should happen is an oral history project on the Afro American Studies Institute. The part that I'm talking about is a sliver of it. Everything that happened in the black community in those years happened on this campus.
Yes, sir.
Some cats went to Nation of Islam. And on Fridays we'd be sitting in the dorm room and they come by with Muhammad Speaks, or whatever the paper was called at the time, and some bean pies.
Yeah, a whole bean pie factory in London.
And you know, and the whole process by which the students that were amongst us and once again, we also can't separate, and we did not at the time, separate Wilberforce and Central State from Antioch. So there were students from Wilberforce and Central State living in our dorms.
I was housing director, and every quarter I had to speak to Gene Janis about who was in the damn dorm and who was in those rooms. And every quarter it was a flat out lie.
Right. So, you know, the documenting, doing an oral history, interviewing Chuck Bell, interviewing this gentleman and that gentleman, and where did she go? And that sister right there. I mean, everyone you would interview would have a different recollection, a different story, a different part of the picture. Now, WYSO Radio, y'all want to do something on oral history? We invite you to do an oral history project on the African American Studies Institute, or Afro American Studies Institute. And I'll be happy to help you kind of structure and figure out what that is. But that's the only way that the pictures, that part of the history and that picture is going to be painted. Whatever I'm going to be saying is from my perspective. But there are many perspectives, and there are many people that started, once they realized they have to start calling, well, wait a second, I'm not invited, I'm not on the panel. Well, this is how we get them involved. We get their oral histories, and then we have the whole picture. The third thing, while we were here, Cecil Taylor came here. And, let me have the book. This book, how many know this book? This is Our Music. Okay, I'm going to read you from page 154. And this speaks to the fact that although there are probably less than 100 people in this room, and Antioch is a small college, and we don't necessarily think it's that important. Let's see. Okay, despite Klein's enthusiasm for the project, meaning Cecil Taylor coming to Antioch, his report to the Rockefeller Foundation carried some warnings. Although he did not consider Taylor a black nationalist, Klein worried that the workshops might become segregated along racial lines. Taylor's view of jazz as an African-American art and reluctance to work with Jerry Mulligan, who had been recommended by New York Times critic John S. Wilson, blah, 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 raised the specter of Crow Jim, a concept Klein clearly had been briefed about. The Afro American Studies Institute's ability to win concessions from the Antioch administration further complicated the picture. Its head, William Brower, who Klein described as, quote, extremely bright and a natural leader, unquote, supported Taylor's residency in avowedly nationalistic terms. The proposal is good, he suggested during Klein's meeting with student representatives, because its core is black music and it helps promote the reconstruction of black people and that they are a nation. Indeed, the Rockefeller Foundation rejected Antioch's initial application for support, largely out of fear that AASI would, quote, capture, unquote, the project and exclude white students and instructors. Taylor accepted an appointment at the University of Wisconsin-Madison instead, and the Rockefeller Foundation only backed the project and secured Taylor's services after Antioch's trustees abolished AASI and secured matching funds. Now, that's a non sequitur. Like if you went somewhere else, then why did anything Antioch do matter? And in fact, his conclusion is wrong. When we went to the board of directors and had the ultimate meeting where we got out of AASI, went to ISSP, the whole student body, black students in AASI, attended that meeting. And I was the sole voice speaking. And what did we ask for? We asked for the end of AASI, not Jim Dixon. AASI ended AASI and announced that we wanted an institute for the solution of social problems and that we wanted the scholarship program to be broadened for Vietnam vets, for poor whites, for Native Americans, as well as African Americans. So we had gone through a process that had led us to a different place. And we only used AASI to protect our development to that point. So just to correct the record, the last part of this statement is a non sequitur. It doesn't make any sense. And it's historically inaccurate. Now, in 1973, Cecil Taylor recorded in Antioch Hall. The recording is called Indent. Prior to that, I had reel-to-reel tapes of performances that he made with an ensemble that, to my knowledge, have not been issued. Cecil Taylor just died. And he's in the pantheon along with John Coltrane and Ornette Coleman and all the rest of those guys. And Charlie Parker and Dexter Gordon. I mean, they represent different strains of the music, but they are all recognized as masters of this music. So recently, back in the New York Times, big article, lost tapes of John Coltrane discovered. So why can't there be, a year from now, the back page of the New York Times saying, lost tapes of Cecil Taylor discovered? They are relatively equal in the pantheon of jazz greats. And these tapes have been sitting in my storage for 50 years. I hadn't played them until I had them digitized. When I had the AASI tapes digitized, I had the Cecil Taylor stuff digitized. And they're on Dropbox. So those are three specific things that could come out of this: the collection, the oral history project, and the Cecil Taylor recording.
Now follow that shit.
Yeah. And when I thought about coming here and speaking, I thought something just like Mason Bill would happen just before me. And so I said, well, then don't prepare anything. Just wing it. I'm more coming from the perspective of one of the students who was in the black dorm in AASI and was touched by Bob Rhodes. I remember I just dropped a tab of I can't remember now. Yeah, it wasn't acid. It wasn't acid. And so I was laying on the floor in the dorm, and then this guy started talking about dialectical materialism and subjectivism and this philosophy. You need to take a more objective approach. And I had never heard anything like that. And I'd been going to classes at Antioch. I had never heard anything like that. So it took me a while to reach full consciousness, but it did affect me. And so I started going to the classes. And I enjoyed the intellectual rigor that you were speaking about. It eventually helped me. I graduated eventually in political science, but those Bob Rhodes experiences and Harold Rogers and some of the other scholars that came from the University of Chicago, I found them very challenging. And I absorbed a lot of material, more material that I didn't know until later on in life. And in fact, I've carried that type of critical analysis throughout my life, both socially as well, politically, as well as through the academic stuff I did after Antioch.
What are you doing now?
I just retired from NASA. I was an electronics engineer for the last 35 years. But
After he went to Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and the International Finance at Johns Hopkins. So,
I got all that from Antioch. Yeah. And well, in fact, I want to thank Chuck Bell here, because one day, it was in our senior year, I went over to his dorm to smoke a dope, as usual. And he was busy filling out applications to graduate school. I said, what is this? He said, these are applications to graduate school. You got to go. I said, well, give me one. And that's how I got to Johns Hopkins School of Advanced That's the truth. So I guess I had a lot more social experiences in the AASI environment and ISSP, which eventually it morphed into. And I've got tons of stories to share, but we probably have to share them like one-on-one. You know? I was glad to run into Renee Palmer, who I hadn't seen in about 5 or 6 years maybe. And she was in the dorm with us, and she shared a lot of stuff with us. In fact, she should be sitting on this panel with us right now. And I just ran into her just before I came in the building. And there's so many of us who aren't here that once they found out that this was going on, that they wanted to say, well, wait, why didn't you invite us? Well, I mean, it happened quickly, and it was focused around getting the tapes digitized. Come on, Renee. So once I heard that Mason and Bill wanted to preserve Bob Rhodes' stuff, I definitely wanted to be a part of it. And I'm so glad we were able to get it this far. I didn't even know there was a Kevin McGruder that was here at Antioch. So I found out about Kevin through Mason, Bill. And although I never made any of those conference calls, I was just too busy trying to get out of where I was trying to retire and get out of there. I knew it was worthwhile coming back to Antioch, at least for this one. I've been back several times, but they were mostly social events. But this is something that's fundamental and something that I believed in 47 years ago, and I still believe in today.
Well, there's really not a whole lot I can say at this point. I lived through this. Mason, I, and Renee, we were all part of the Antioch program for interracial education. We were all part of the Antioch program for interracial education. So we came in not really, I came in not knowing anything about Antioch.
Right in front of your mouth. It's on. Hold it right in front.
They call that eating the mic.
Gesture with your right.
I don't know anything about that. Hello? Oh, okay. I thought I have a pretty loud voice. I thought I could cover this room. But I came in on the Antioch program for interracial education in 1966 out of St. Louis, Missouri, North St. Louis. I had no idea until Antioch, until I got a full scholarship as part of Rockefeller student. But I had no idea. I just wanted to go to college. I applied to a program. I did some things, and they selected me. So they sent me up here. They sent me to Antioch. I came up here for a week just to look at the situation. I had never been on a college campus before. Well, not like Antioch. But once I got here, I was Antiochian. I left, I came back. This is where I wanted to be. This is the best place I could be. But it was totally different from my environment. So, and I think, if I could say the same thing with Holt. Was it totally different from your environment? So it was. We used to have, like May said, we used to have meetings once a week with Jewel Graham, and they would be recorded. And we would always talk about the strange things that that were so different from the environment that we had come out of, that we encountered here, and we needed that because there was a cultural shock, and and those meetings helped us to get through this. My first year at Antioch, my counselor told me, he said, Chuck, don't worry about doing anything really, doing any heavy stuff. Just enjoy the situation, and absorb the culture. So I took a course called Communication and Interpersonal Relations. I took Piano 1. I took horseback riding. I think I took a French course for about 2 minutes. I had one calc course, and after 2 weeks, the calc teacher came to, he had a meeting. He asked us to come stay after class. It was only 4 black guys in the class, and he asked all 4 of us to stay after class. And he said, I noticed that, you guys never say anything in the class. So we looked at each other and we looked at him. We said, because we don't know what you're talking about. And when I got home from my first semester and I showed my father my report card from Antioch, he said, what are you, horseback riding? What kind of shit, piano? What are you doing up there? We're gonna bring you back. But I said, you can't bring me back because you didn't pay. I'm here. I'm gonna be here. And it was really an experience. I learned things that I would never been exposed to. It was life-changing for me. And that's before I even got in the dorm. That was, I'm talking about my first 2 years, my first year and a half. Dorm really began in like 68. We started in 68, 67. And that was another life changer. But I could go on. I could go on and on and on and on and on and on, and it would take days for me to talk. I could continue to talk about Antioch because I haven't even talked about Bob. I have my own experience with Bob and Marxism, Leninism, and dialectical materialism, and scientific socialism, because I'm all of that today, and that developed right here. And it's like you can't unring a bell. Once you learn certain things about the world, you can't, unlearn it. So my experience here it set me off into a direction that I'm still pursuing. And even though I'm retired now, I'll be a protester till I die. I'm always I'm an activist and a protester. One of the funny things that happened to me, I'm from St. Louis, and I don't know if you know about Mike Brown. Well, we went to had a demonstration for Mike Brown shortly after he was murdered. And it was a huge demonstration, one of the largest that St. Louis has ever had. But when we got down to the point where they were going to have like speakers, and the speakers, they had a little podium up there, and the speakers came, and the speakers got up there, and it was like Lil Ray J from Cincinnati, DJ such and such from Columbus, I didn't know any of the people. I didn't know any of the people on the podium. I didn't know, but they represented organizations from all over the country. And one of the ladies, one of the speakers, she said, "All right, I want everybody to take out your cell phones, and we're going to take a mass selfie." And me and an old St. Louis activist named Percy Green, who was, been in the movement, since I was a little kid. But we were sitting in the back, and we realized that, this is a young person's thing now. Percy's 75, I'm 70. These are a group selfie. Everybody took out their cameras. We're trying to figure out how to take a selfie. Like, what are they talking about? But this is, it still goes on. Black Lives Matter emerged out of this. They're still trying to find their way. They don't have an ideology. They're still reacting. Being here taught us how to go beyond just reacting. It gave us a plan, how to... But like I said, I could keep on going. I'm gonna stop here and give it to Renee.
Well, I was definitely...
When I first got here, I had to walk down and walk to the stoop. That soul side is abandoned now. But that's where all the activity was. And I walked down to the stoop. I said, here I am at the stoop. And then I walked up, and I said, damn, I'm on Red Square. Here's Red Square. Red Square was where the folk dancing occurred. I had never seen a folk dance in my life until I came here. On Fridays and Saturdays, that square used to be jam-packed with people dancing, doing all kinds of dances. So, this brings back a lot of memories.
You talking to the folk dancers.
I had to break down and do a couple,
So, thank you. I was definitely not expecting this. I was willing to be sitting as in the audience and just listening and being sort of enthralled as everyone shared their experience. But I too entered Antioch through the program, and with a lot of trepidation and fear and anxiety. I knew I wanted to be here because, first of all, it was further. I'm from Chicago. And it was the furthest place away from home, at that point, which is where I wanted to be. And living in that, urban experience, having to transition to a very small environment, was in and of itself a challenge. And then, not to mention the fact that there were very few African American students on campus. And Chicago during that period was extremely segregated, very segregated. So all of my experiences obviously had been melded in the African American community. And, obviously there was a lot of white flight, during that period. And I'm sure it's safe to say this, but I was born in the late 40s. So being on the campus was a rude awakening, but it was certainly something, despite my anxieties, something that I was ready for and prepared to do, and really looked forward to it. But one of the amazing things, I had no idea of everything that you talked about in terms of AASI. I was... I knew at age 11 I wanted to be a teacher. So that was my mission. And that was sort of the way that I proceeded. And, obviously that first year, I did nothing. I did horseback riding. I went kayaking. I learned about that. Fencing. I took some fencing classes and really enjoyed that. Because all of those things were not available, growing up and going through the school system in Chicago. And I took advantage of the AEA program. I was in London in '68, and I remember watching on TV, just mortified. We were watching the '68 convention in Chicago, and, as well as, everything else that was happening during that period. And, being in London during that time, I felt so isolated and I think afraid, which was real dichotomy. I'm not really sure of why that was, but just having that separation of watching a city, during that Democratic convention, just being, just the brutality that occurred during that period. It was really frightening. So then, returning to the U.S. and then, I was not really. I was sort of on the periphery of AASI. I was involved with the women. Yolanda and I, we would hang out, and Linda Wilson. I don't know if you remember Linda, and Carolyn. So there were many women who were really directly involved. But for some reason, I was, sort of on the outskirts. I knew. I understood the relevancy, and I was very much affected by it and moved by it, but for some reason, had not, fully engulfed myself. And then, consequently, later on, many years later, the guy that I married, whose name was Abdullah, was one of the student, I guess, professors. He and Bob Rhodes and Harold Rogers formed, and I can't remember the guy's name from Philadelphia. Tony Montero, as well as the women from Chicago. Oh, I can't. Leith, yes, and there were two others. One became a doctor.
Joe Howard, Michael Pratt.
The women. Okay, but anyway, he was so my lessons occurred on the weekends. Abdullah was my husband, and he was involved with the institute. But so my lessons about what was going on occurred in the evenings. He and I would talk, and so that was sort of my introduction to Marxism Leninism, and because and one of the beauties of being on campus during that period, and it was, was certainly sort of unaware of this, but it has definitely formed my perspective, and it has given me that analysis in which to, evaluate, just the whole political structure. And, I am eternally grateful for that experience that I've had, and that, continues to be a part of my existence today. I became a public school teacher as well as an administrator. And, it has always been my philosophy to be in an urban environment, to be, and I also taught students with special needs, but to be with students from all aspects, of life, and from many different cultures, and to just provide them, with as much, political insight that I garnered as a result of my experience here at Antioch. And the other thing is, I was very much involved. My grandfather was a member of the Teamsters, and he was a hardcore member of the Teamsters too. And this was the 20s and 30s, and which also gave me a little bit, a footing and insight, into the whole labor movement, and that, directed my involvement and association with the American Federation of Teachers, but again, all of that, would not have been an opportunity for me had I not participated, or had I not been a part of the Antioch experience, and then, superficially with AASI, but then more directly, with the man that I married, who was directly, involved with AASI. So, thank you. And as I said, I was definitely not expecting to be on this end. I was, I'm sorry, one last thing. I would like for all of us, to give a healthy round of applause to everyone here who has, definitely participated in in the formation of the Institute many, many years ago. And I had no idea that you had that collection of information, which was, I was as much astounded and surprised as everyone else, just hearing that. So I want to thank all of you.
And from Los Angeles.
Yeah. Before we open up for questions and answers, I just want to show some images from that time and play a couple excerpts from tapes then. This is the Antiochian that announces the formation. It's a front page article from 1968 that announces the formation of the Institute.
Can we turn the light for a second? We're trying to figure out the light.
They're in the back. Mary, there.
I just don't want to blow up right here.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And in 1969, Bill had mentioned that Leon Panetta came and investigated the program. This is an article in Jet magazine that coincidentally was written by a friend of mine from Harlem, Valerie Jo Bradley, that announces that the program could go forward. And it's an 8-page article, so for those of you who are familiar with Jet, that's a long article for Jet. With a lot of pictures. And on that picture on the right, that's Bill with the President Jim Dixon. And that's the bookstore that the Institute owned in Springfield. And these are the kinds of things I mentioned that I believe are unique even for the Black campus movement. And also I've learned recently they formed a separate legal entity. And I think that is unusual. They owned a gas station, they owned other things. So there's some really exciting things that they were doing.
Sometimes we were doing some Booker T. Washington, sometimes some W. Du Bois. You know.
You gotta try it all.
So
Yeah.
the Leon Panetta thing, how that actually evolves is, Antioch, we had self-segregated, and the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare wanted to, basically we were called to Washington to explain what we were doing. And Leon Panetta was actually not in the conversation, he was observing the conversation. And we gave him kind of a cockamamie excuse as to why we should be allowed to self-segregate. Both of those are individuals that we acknowledged in the libation. They're both gone, Les McClellan and your lady. So we told them that we had discovered that the federal government, in doing research on, what's the blood disease we have? On sickle cell anemia, had allowed for the segregation of blood. So that was one fact that we had. And then there was the Moynihan stuff that said, the Black community is dysfunctional because of the family and all that stuff. So that was the other fact. So we said, well, look, you can't say that you don't allow segregation because we found an instance where you did. That is the blood studies. And your main social scientists are saying we're all screwed up. So maybe we need to isolate ourselves to work these issues out. That's when Leon Panetta got involved. And the press conference that was set up downstairs from where we were meeting in Washington got canceled. And Leon Panetta came in and said, you know what, I think we need to send a team out to look at what you're doing. So they sent the team out, Black guy, white woman. When he walked in the dorm, the guy had a glass with some liquor in it. So what type of investigation was he doing? It's like they had a free weekend in the country, whatever that couple was. And this article then comes out of that. And I think, go back to the picture of the desk, if you can go back. So, no, okay, so this is the really interesting picture. because the center volume is volume 38 of Lenin. Then there's a James Boggs pamphlet. James Boggs was a labor organizer out of Detroit. There's his pamphlet. Then there's a plate of cold grits. I'm not sure what the other volume looks like. It looks like a dictionary, it could be, or something. And then the picture there is a work of art by Ron Hassan Clark, who's also acknowledged in libation. He's deceased. And that kind of, to me, represents what my AASI experience was. It was black art, black music, and revolutionary ideology. That's where we were coming from at that point in time. Yeah. Go forward. Okay, no, go back. Go back to Rob. Okay, next page. Okay, stop there. So on this picture, this brother gone. Exo Matthews, he gone. I think that's Skip Bailey. That's me. Ron D is gone. That's Sue Marshall. She wanted to come but couldn't. I'm not sure who this is. That is the bookstore. This one, I'm not sure. Go to the next picture. Okay, next picture. Okay, now they're saying that this was, I don't believe we ever had meetings where there was a bed in the room to listen to tapes, but that's a dorm room.
Actually, there's only, of the people in that picture, 2 of them are Central State students. One is Buddy Adams from Yellow Springs. Alvin Bailey is Skip Bailey. Cynthia Taylor is from Dayton, and he ran for office a few times and married Vivian Lundy and Lucy Summers. So, there were always a group of people in that dormitory who were there to learn, but weren't always Antioch students. So it was a community effort.
Next. Okay. This is, go back, please. So, again, the culture. Anita Gordon, Lucy Summers, Genevieve Jones, Marilyn Good, Cynthia Mack. I mean, these are all, people that we were doing the dance, the music. When we went to, at one point they sent us to New York to meet with Eleanor Holmes Norton. I think it was Eleanor Holmes at the time. And to interest her in trying to raise funds for what we're doing. And then that weekend, after we had that meeting, we hung out, what was that, Count Basis? Ran into, what's the singer? You sang with Pharoah Sanders? Leon Thomas. Yeah, bought some of the best smoke I ever had from Leon Thomas that night, yeah. And look, we it's funny, we talk about marijuana now, but it's actually coming to be. Like, I can talk to my kids and say, I'm not a criminal. I've been smoking marijuana since I was 16 years old. In fact, I came to Antioch by virtue of a gentleman named Marty Cook. I went to Western Reserve Academy in Hudson, Ohio. A guy who was a year ahead of me was Marty Cook, who was from Yellow Springs. And he said, one weekend, he said, and he played trombone and I played at drums, and we had a little band. And so we were really close. We were kind of the outliers at Western Reserve Academy. And he said, come down to Yellow Springs with me. I came down to Yellow Springs. His parents weren't home that weekend, so we had to run at his house and to run at the Springs. Y'all had the midnight movie or something? Yeah. You had co-ed dorms. Various substances were flowing freely around campus. Like you, once I got here, that was it.
I can still remember those cake donuts at the donut shop at midnight, open up.
Look, I went downtown this morning looking for the donut shop. I was talking to people on the street, where is the donut shop? So the guy said, well, it used to be next to that building, but over in this store, they got donuts that they make in Zenith that they ship to this. But it wasn't the same. I went and got me a cake donut, it wasn't the same. But that was the great thing, man. Midnight donuts.
As far as that experience, I'm not going to talk about my experience with herbaceous materials. That's not. I don't discuss that in general groups of people. But the fact is that one of my favorite experiences here, and this is getting away from AASI, donuts fine, but the midnight movies you mentioned was going to midnight movies, and there were two movies that I just remember. They showed them more than once, and I asked if I could get them to play it again. That the two movies was Zulu, number one, and the other one was the Naked Prey or something. In Zulu, all the Zulu warriors would creep on their bellies for 500 yards, get up behind the British soldier, and raise up and holler real loud, and get shot. I found that to be so damn ridiculous. Smoking dope to watch that shit was fascinating. And the other thing was Naked Prey, where a white man is captured by some Africans and literally given a chance to run all the way across Africa naked, and he gets away from black hunters who are skilled with weapons and tools and everything, and he's buck naked and he's running and he gets away. What an amazing thing a white man can do.
So this is Robert Rhodes, and I mean, for me, coming back is to somewhat venerate Robert Rhodes, and to hope that something can be established in his memory, because he was really a profound thinker. He influenced a lot of people, not only here but in Athens, Ohio, in Chicago, in Cincinnati, in Kentucky. Robert was a force. And, it's sort of like, I've always thought that you follow the smartest guy you know. Like, it was another smart guy before that guy, but then he outdid that guy, so he became the guy. And Robert was the guy. And I just want to, present his image, so it's just not a name, it's really a person. He just left us within about a year. And it would be so important if this could happen. And then other places, there are other things that would tie into, and I think spring off of doing this. To the next picture. And then we've talked about the book, and this is the recording that was made in 1973 in Antioch Hall by Cecil Taylor, solo piano recording. And actually, Cecil, as a mind, actually, in my mind, is like in the same zone as Robert Rhodes. I mean, he was like Art Tatum. Does that name mean anything to anybody? Yeah. So he was on a level with Art Tatum as a prestidigitator. That is his command of the instrument, just at that level, was at the highest level. And his thinking about what the music, he was also a poet and a dancer and many, many things. And to actually put out a lost recording of his would be another tribute to someone that would be, very, very, very important to do. And then Brute Force. This was a band. Herbie Mann, actually Richard Daniels, was an Antioch student, came before the AASI, before IAPEI, whatever, the Rockefeller program. He preceded that. He had a brother that was at Central State who was a trumpet player, Vietnam vet. And then, so this band had Townies, Central Staters, and Antiochians in it. The idea that they thought at the time was that Herbie Mann, who is a commercially viable jazz artist and who produced this, would provide some career path for them. That didn't happen. And listening to the music, it sounds dated, sounds like some rock, pop, R&B stuff from that period of time. And we have this by virtue of Sue Marshall. Sue Marshall couldn't be here, but she dug through her things and she came up with the album. And she also came up with an article from Ebony Magazine a special issue, August of 1979, dealing with the black student aspect of the social revolution that was happening, or we thought was happening. And so there are pictures in here from Cornell and from other student initiatives and rebellions and whatnot. But on page 145, there's the picture of the black dorm. So again, you know, we want to emphasize the significance of what we did in those 3 or 4 years, and the fact that that people were actually looking at it at a national level, evaluating it, making decisions about it, influencing what we did or didn't do. You know, David Truly. We mentioned a number of people that had passed, and in going through my files, I found this program from David Truly's passing, and I thought it important to include. And you know, it was done at Rankin Chapel. It's funny, both with David Truly's passing and Gary Harris's passing, their wives both asked that you know, I participate in the funeral. So again, in their lives, this was important. And they wanted people connected to that experience to be a part of memorializing them. And if you can read this language, and you know, when I first met David Truly, he's from west side of Chicago. And I don't know whether the suit was orange or green or blue, but it was a lime green suit or an orange suit or a peach suit with the same color shoes and the same kind of hat. And he showed up on campus that way. And a pool stick. He had the pool stick and a little, you know, where they screw it together.
Best pool shooter I ever seen.
He was killer. He was a killer pool player. And that was his identity. I don't know who decided, why they decided that David Truly should come here, but when he came to this campus, he was a pool shark. He evolved into a media specialist, a filmmaker, devoted to documenting the movement. That's what the experience did for David Truly. So if one could get close and just read this bio, you would really see in a nutshell, you know, what happened here to black students during, or some of us during that period. Some of us did not do well. Some of us crashed and burned. But it's interesting. What did you say?
Wait a minute. Oh, I want to address that.
Okay.
One damn thing. I've been around this town, live in Dayton, so one of the things I've heard for 50 fucking years is to hear people talk about the failure of the Antioch program for interracial education. It was a failure. That's what I'm told. In question and answer, I warn anybody in this room, don't say that dumb shit to me. Okay? Because the fact is that what they talked about was the retention rate was not high. The retention rate wasn't the retention rate wasn't, you know, because there was so many dropouts. But the fact is the retention rate for the APIE program was up around in 1984, let me back up. In 1984, as far as I go back, in 1984, the retention rate for African Americans in every university around this country was about, the graduation rate, I should say, was about 28%. Okay? By the way, it's 38% in 2016. All right. So the AASI had a retention rate up around 50%. So I worked I'm retired from the University of Dayton. I worked with a program, the minor engineering program, in which we have a whole program developed toward dealing with feelings of isolation, dealing with self-efficacy, helping students deal with those microaggressions that they run into on a day in and day out in school. And we pride ourselves on having a 50-60% graduation rate. So, if you want to talk about the Antioch Program for Interracial Education, tell me how much it was a damn success. Thank you very much, because Jewel Graham did a great job. I'm not going to have that argument again with folks. But if you come back with me again, I've given you the facts, I've given you the truth. Anything coming at me is ignorance or racism. You got that clear? Yeah. Thank you.
This is a minute, a couple minutes from a tape, and then we will open up for questions. This is Afro American history.
First, without an analysis of the people. Going down without speaking TAT and all the languages down there, trying to off police stations and People's Republic and all that, without the support of the people. In other words, he was a fish without the sea, as Miles said. He was a fish without the sea. He didn't have no people around him to protect him. So therefore, that question of when to go into armed struggle, or when to carry out your most sophisticated program, revolutionary dictator, which is a hell of a concept, revolutionary dictator, democratic dictatorship of the proletariat. Or in other words, the rule by the working class people in this country, which is something people do not accept. They do not see that. Do not see their class interests. Now, this also is predicated on the belief, when he's talking about that, is a breakdown in the superstructure. Now, what do we mean by the superstructure? That reflects what? That comes from what? Right, from the basics, which is, in other words, your economic relations of society. This is where the superstructure, the political system and so forth, has broken down. Now, what we've seen develop, what we've seen develop in Russia, is that in the bourgeois Russian societies, the superstructure was just as important as, that is, what manifested as how people allocated resources, religion, social beliefs and all that.
I'll stop it there. I want to open up for questions. And if you could raise your hand, and we're recording, so if you can wait for me to bring the mic to you.
Hi. That's very enthusiastic. Huh? Yeah, oh yes, introduce myself. So my name is Angelica, Benton, Molina.
There are 8 buttons.
That's fine.
And so my parents were here around the time, I think, that you guys were here too. Both my parents graduated in '76. And my mom was a part, I believe, of the program. And my dad, Ron Benton, his family's from here, he just passed away in September. So I don't know if anybody knew him or not, but...
Little basketball player.
Yes, yeah, he went to Central State. Yeah. And then got a knee injury. Met my mom in town, and she was like, "Why aren't you at Antioch?" So, because my grandmother worked in the kitchen, and so she's like, "You go tuition free. Why aren't you there?" But anyways, I also wanted to, and I'm a graduate. It's '97, so I came back. So it was really interesting coming back, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're Mary Benton's granddaughter." Yeah. But now I wanted to ask about. So right now I live in Austin, Texas, and been working with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond for a long time. And so I didn't get to meet Jim Dunn. So I didn't know if any of you guys knew him or took classes with him.
Jim Dunn, but that was long after these guys.
That was, you guys were already gone.
These guys were gone. I'm from Dayton. I kept leaving
So you got
Dayton. Worked in Michigan, California, New York. Kept coming back to Dayton talking about, but I'm too cosmopolitan for this place. And it just dawned on me that I keep coming back. There must be a damn reason.
There must be a reason.
I like it. I'm from there, so.
Right.
But yeah, I do get Jim Dunn.
Yeah, and then also I've heard, and I haven't heard too much, but like the Black Panther presence on campus. Did you guys?
So the Black Panther Party didn't have really a presence within what we were doing because, ideologically speaking, we thought of them as adventurous, or at least I did. But there were Black Panthers at Central State and at Wilberforce, In fact, one of the, I can't think of her name now, but she's currently a professor of Afro American Studies at Rutgers Camden, was in the Black Panther Party and the president of the student body at Wilberforce. So there were Black Panthers in Dayton, the Lasley family, which Mike Lasley was a student at Central State and close to us at Antioch. His brother was chairman of the Black Panther Party in Dayton. So that was the presence. We were aware of their literature, but you know, from where we were, and we thought we would be being trained by the supreme intellectuals of the left. So why deal with people running around with shotguns in the street? I mean, that would be one way of dismissing it. But we just felt, or I felt, I don't know how the others feel about it, but I felt that where we were ideologically meant we could appreciate what they were doing, we could support it, but that wasn't what we were going to do.
Let's take, there were hands on that side, so we'll alternate back and forth.
My name is Gene Milgram. I'm class of '69, lived in Maples at the time, 150 feet diagonally across from the black dorm. But my question is, as I understand it, the reason the federal government got involved was because an African-American student at Antioch named Michael Myers filed the complaint with them. And my question is, how did you feel about Michael then, and how do you now feel about Michael? And I believe Michael got involved in a career that at some point he ended up working for the NAACP.
Yeah, he was very heavily involved in NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And Michael was a square then, he's a square now. Okay, so now that's dismissive, and that would be typical of something to say. But Michael Myers was a protege, what was the guy's name? Kenneth Clark, who did the psychological stuff in the 54 decision, and who happens to be a relative of mine, which I found out later. So Michael kind of did what he did at the instigation or with the approval of Kenneth Clark. And an example of what happened on the campus is I assaulted Michael Myers on this campus, because he used to regularly bring students to register, and we would say no. And then one day he was walking across campus and something went off in my head, just went over and clocked him. Now, I mean, that's not to say that was the right thing. It wasn't the right thing to do. Assaulting another person is never right or acceptable. But I did it, and was brought up before some student, faculty, or something about it, and it was dismissed. So I guess I want to say that it was wrong.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Kenneth Clark, just to add, was a trustee.
Yes, and he resigned the board.
That's right.
Right. And what was the big lawyer? I think his name was Joe Rao. Who was the major labor lawyer that was on the board? It was Joe Rao. The board meeting at which we decided to abandon AASI for ISAP was occasioned by Joe Rao saying, I'm going to resign. Like, we can't have this at Antioch, blah, blah, blah. And we went to the board meeting, and I think the expectations was that we would continue to defend that position. But we just flipped it. We don't want that anymore. So, yes, Michael, and when I said...
By the way, that's on tape, too.
Yeah, that's one of the tapes, is a tape of that meeting. The board presentation, the full statement.
And Rao was also the lawyer who helped sell out the Mississippi Freedom.
No, I'm not, Joe Rao was a great guy. We're not, nobody's diminishing that. I mean, he
also sold out the Mississippi Freedom Party at the 64 Democratic Convention.
Oh, so that's an example of him compromising himself or his principles, or what you perceive to be his principles. Okay.
We got several other questions. This was scheduled to end at 11:45. Can we go till noon? And we'll try to get as many questions as we have. We'll keep alternating, so we have a question here, then the next one will be over there.
That's why we have to have an oral history program, because you can't get it in 2 hours.
Well, I know I came here and graduated '68, and so I was here during that time too. And one of my good friends introduced me to Coltrane and to, I think it was probably Brute Force, because there was a band I know we went and he played with too, and I've lost track of him, but Arthur Brooks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And, yeah. And he wasn't initially with your group, but I know when I talked to him, it's like, oh yeah, he was able to kind of stay friends with me and stay friends and do those things, and yet, and you know, still be within both camps, kind of like it sounds like you were later on.
You know, but let's be clear. Yeah, I mean, isn't your wife here?
That lady right there?
That's his wife. Okay, so the issue, when we came here in '66, there was relationships between black students and white students of similar background. Okay, and it didn't so in '66 when I arrived, we didn't self-segregate. That came in '67 or '68. So there were plenty of relationships that preceded that, and that continued as we had the black dorm. In fact, the instance where the Little Brothers and one or two other individuals came to the black dorm to confront a black student who they had a conflict with earlier in the day. They confronted Maurice Peters. Maurice Peters was walking Central. We were all getting in cars, getting ready to go to Wilberforce, or several of us were. The four of them, Maurice is walking Century, the four of them approached him about the conflict that had existed prior in the day. Now, the Little Brothers were fighting with Jumba and Larry Smith, who came later. They didn't come with us in '66. So they didn't have those friendships with the Little Brothers. So they were sort of like, you're gonna come like, you know. And that night, there was terror on this campus because they assaulted him, a weapon was pulled, a weapon was shot, he was grazed, we got out of the cars, they spattered all over campus. Their rooms were overturned that night. Whatever that was in the room, we probably took it. I mean, a lot of crazy stuff happened on that night. And the police chief called us, and we told him that the only way their safety could be guaranteed is if they leave Yellow Springs. And that night, the Little Brothers and the other guy, I forget his name, they all left. Eddie Rodriguez, they all left. And that led to other things. But then while we were on the trip to New York to see Ellen Holmes Norton, the campus brought back one of the Little Brothers. And he had dinner in the Antioch Inn or whatever that place was called. And the students that he beefed with, that had we been here, we might have been able to intervene, they decided to go pistol whip his behind. And they did that. They watched him, and when he went to the bathroom in Antioch Inn, they followed him into the bathroom and pistol whipped him. And a gun went off and he got grazed in the head. We got back, went to visit him in Dayton, and told him, why would you betray us to serve them? So he would not divulge who pistol whipped him. He knew who was in the bathroom. He knew who had the weapon. He knew who shot him. But he understood that there was more in common, that he had more in common with the black students than he did with, frankly, the largely more upper middle class white campus. And chose, I got it, he'll get in, and chose not to identify who did the act. So you might not be following what I'm saying. I'm saying if we...
What I'm saying, though, is that as a white student, and as somebody who came from a Western, all-white Colorado, I didn't fit into Antioch either. You know, most of the people were from the East. So, to me, I was learning all these different people and learning, and especially enjoyed the Coltrane and lots of other things that I had never been exposed to. And I was open, and it was Intellectually, I understand it, and I don't necessarily disagree with having to be separate and doing that. But emotionally, it was really hard for me to feel like it wasn't inclusive anymore.
Can I say this? What we did was not a fairy tale.
Right.
Okay? So it wasn't neat, it wasn't always pretty, but most of all, it wasn't a fairy tale. And a lot of the things that happened on hindsight, I'm 70 now. I don't think I would do the same things from my perspective now that I did when I was 18 or 19. A lot of people, including us, were damaged in certain ways by what happened. So, we're here talking about AASI, and there's probably a whole nother meeting that needs to be happening about how other students receive this experience.
Be inclusive and not have these keep going with Black Lives Matter and having it be such a antagonism among people, whatever.
I feel like we're not here to debate the validity of the work that they did. We're really here to like just listen. So I don't know if it's, I just feel like we need to.
No, but I would like to address the discomfort that people may be feeling, and it's legitimate.
But I do want to get some other voices from the panel, and so Chuck, you've had your hand up for a little while.
Yeah, I just wanted to just kind of clarify some things. The overall picture in the country at the time, in 1960, Martin Luther King got killed in 1960, was murdered in 1968. The whole mood of the country was different.
Robert Kennedy got killed.
Yeah.
Democratic Convention in 68.
All of that. So, this was a turbulent time. Somebody mentioned Mike Myers. Well, in response to Mike Myers' complaints, the APIE program decided to expand and bring in white students, poor and disadvantaged white students. When you mentioned the Little Brothers were like one of the first. They were one of the first. They came in the first group. I think it was about 6 white students.
But only one of them. It was one little brother that was a scholarship, and the other little brother just came here because his brother was here. He wasn't in the program.
I didn't know. I thought they was all in the program. But they ran into I used to talk to the littles all the time, and they ran into similar program. They ran into similar problems. They had cultural shock coming from a poor white community, just like I had cultural shock coming from a poor black community. And we used to sit around and talk. He said, Chuck, it's not a lot of difference between me and you. We eat greens too. We have the same diet. Our neighborhood don't look too much better than yours. We have a lot. I have more in common with you than I do with the rest of the students on the campus. And my more affluent white friends would say, Chuck, why are you hanging around with the Little Brothers? That's trash. That's what they call them, trash. No, that's, I couldn't understand that. But it brought, it's a class problem. That's, I'm listening, we were going, it's funny because all this stuff, when we were introduced to Bob Rhodes and at AASI, we're having a problem because we went to HEW came down on us, and that's the reason why we went to see Eleanor Holmes Norton, because she was going to help us get out of that problem. But at the same time, we had dealt with Bob Rhodes, and so our ideology and philosophy was changing, and it changed like it was almost like, this is great. We're having problems with AASI. They're threatening to take money from the school if we keep the program on. But when Bob Rhodes came down here and saw our curriculum, he laughed at it. He's like, black science, black history, black this, black that. This is ridiculous.
How about feudalism?
Yeah. we want to kick his butt. He coming down here to down in our stuff, but he made so much sense, and he was so convincing that by the time the pressure was on us to get rid of AASI, we was ready to junk it anyway. We had junked it. It was junked. We were off into the Institution for the Solution of Social Problems, and if you were fighting for social change, what we say, black, white, blue, green, grizzly, gray, we don't give a damn. Come see us. We won't fight. We'll do this together. So we open the doors to everyone. If you for social change, come on in. And that dissolved the problem. That eliminated the problem.
So we probably have time for about maybe one or two more questions.
Is there a question from the side row?
Back to this side then. Yeah.
My name is Joan Stockton. I graduated in '65. In 1969, is this thing on? Yeah. Okay. In 1969, I joined the Workers' League out of New York. And it had come out of the Socialist Workers' Party. It was young people who were it was a Trotskyist organization. Did you ever get involved with Trotskyist organizations?
No, we were Leninists.
Trotsky, Lenin.
But you know that argument. We were Leninists.
No, it was actually the Maoists. You know, here was the Maoists versus the.
But amongst the materials that I have donated to the university are some Trotskyite materials.
Okay, this is going to be the final question.
Why were they afraid of Hector Cooper?
We used to call Hector Cooper Dr. Crime.
Who was
Dr.
he?
Crime.
Who was he?
So Hector Cooper was a student. He probably came in about 69 or 70. Yeah.
There was a student here who actually there was actual article written in Esquire magazine. The title of the article was, who's afraid?
No, Hector Cooper doesn't like you either.
Yeah, Hector Cooper doesn't like you either. That's right.
Yeah.
Dr. Crime was doing crime on us too.
Yeah. Hector Cooper was an incredible individual. But when he came to campus, and I remember there was a big meeting, and he came, I'm Hector Cooper, blah, 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 blah. Well, he didn't realize that we had George Beatty, Junebug, we had Ahmad Shabazz, we had some other individuals that were prepared to do whatever he thought he wanted to do. So he basically came. Now, a lot of the weapons that we had on campus came through Hector Cooper. Because a lot of the weapons that we had came from Hector Cooper.
I bought my pistol for my mother's boyfriend.
But I'm not talking about pistols. I'm talking about shotguns. I'm talking about carbines. I'm talking about long rifle type weapons.
You want to discuss all of that here?
Yeah. Wait. There's a positive take to be made on that, and I want to give tribute to Police Chief McKee. Jim McKee was basically our savior to a certain extent. Jim McKee kept Sheriff Bradley, who wanted to roll in here from Xenia and wipe out the AASI, wipe out Unity House, and the FBI and every damn body else wanted to come in here and basically rid this problem. And Jim McKee basically said, I'll handle this, I'll take care of it, stay out of his town. And he was able to do it in such a way and neutralize threats and neutralize problems to the point that we were able, by and large, all of us lived through it. And I think it has good to do with Jim McKee.
Well, now, see, I thought Jim McKee was scared of us. See, I thought we had so many weapons that he didn't want to move on us. Now, Maceo's saying that he just was like, well, they some good little kids, and we'll just provide a cocoon around them. But Yellow Springs was a cocoon, and we do recognize that had we been advocates or activists along these lines in Cincinnati or Dayton or maybe Xenia,
Definitely.
then the results would have been quite different.
That would have been or any other place other than Yellow Springs. Maybe Overland might be the only other place you can get away with that.
I never viewed myself,
I can't.
in 1968, I never viewed myself as an old man sitting here.
Well, we're going to have to let that be the last word. So please join our panelists. Give our panelists a round of applause, please.